Hey, shalom and welcome to the Did You Know section of Wisdom and Torah Ministries. Today's Did You Know is about the Parasha Kedoshim. Now, did you know that the commandments and the instructions given to us in this week's Parasha, when you connect it with ancient Near Eastern practices surrounding Israel, it just makes more and more sense. It makes sense. You finally get a greater understanding of why is it that Moses was trying to do, and what is the contrast that the Creator, Elohim, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is trying to bring a contrast and a difference between the worship of other gods versus his way of worship. Now, I want to take you to the screen because I want you to see from different commentaries. I'm going to read you from the Sundervan commentary and from the IVP Bible commentaries. Two different commentaries on this week's parasha. We're going to do a lot of reading because I want to make a contrast between ancient Near Eastern understanding and scripture. Okay, but the verse starts this way: Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el kol adat bnei Israel, ve'amarta elehem kadoshim. All right. Tahu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Now, what does that say? Be holy, for I am holy. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I am Adonai Elohim, I am holy. Now, the question is, how can you attain the holiness of the Creator? Never. You can never attain it. Or can we? Or what is the contrast that he's trying to let us know in regards, why would the Lord take the time to say, I want you to be separated to me as I am separated to you? Now, let me make a contrast between those words on the Parasha Vayikra Kedoshim and let's look to ancient Near Eastern evidence. Now, when you go to the Sundervan commentary and in the section of verse 19, chapters 19 verse 2 says, be holy because I, the Lord Elohim, am holy. Now, when you compare that to the Egyptian instruction of Amen, be patient with me because these long names I have a tough time with. Amenemope presents the divine standards as unattainable for human beings. Now, check this out. This is what the Egyptians believed. Remember, Israel came out of Egypt for all those years in slavery and all the years living there. Now, according to the instructions, Egyptian instructions of this particular person says, God is ever in his perfection. Man is ever in his failure. The words men say are one thing, the deeds of the God are another. There is no perfection before God, but there is failure before him. If one strains to seek perfection, in a moment he has mirrored it. Okay, so this is really interesting because then all of a sudden you have Israel living in Egypt, raised in that environment, idolatry. They believe that they were limited. They believe that they can never attain the favor of their God or the Egyptian gods. Then all of a sudden now they go to the wilderness and the Creator says, be holy for I am holy. In other words, I want to take you to my mountain and I'm going to give you freedom. I'm going to give you righteous laws. I'm going to separate you. I'm going to raise your honor that you already have as ascribed. But I want you to remember you're no longer slaves. You are Kadosh as a nation. I'm Kadosh. Holy nation. Can you imagine now reading this particular writing of the ancient Egyptians that they all believe that only their gods were perfect, that you can never be anything, that you can never attain to any kind of standards in the eyes of their gods. And now the Creator takes Israel to the mountain and says, by the way, I'm not only going to give you righteous judgment. By the way, I'm not only going to give you perfect laws. By the way, I'm not only going to treat you with equity. By the way, I'm not only going to reveal myself on the mountain, but now I'm also going to make you Kadosh, holy nation, so that you can hear my voice. Hey, did you know that in ancient Egyptian mythology, the kings and the priests, according to the way they believe, they thought only the kings and priests had the power to hear the voices of their gods? And now they go to Mount Sinai and all of Israel listens to the voice of the true Creator and Suzerain, the great King of the universe. Can you imagine why they were so freaked out when they heard the voice of the Lord? Can you imagine when you were taught your whole life that you can never attain to anything, that you'll never be any good? that you can never be good enough in the kingdom of this God. And then the Elohim of Israel says, no, I'm going to give you the laws. I'm going to put before you life and a blessing, death and a curse. You choose which way you want to go. But you have access to me through sacrifices, through prayer, through the relationship, through the feast, and through the Sabbath. I'm going to set you apart so that you can always have intimacy with me. That's the character of the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Elohim of mercy, grace, equity, and justice for his whole kingdom. That's only one. Let's move on to the next thing. Let's go to verse 4. Let's go to verse 4. I'm going to use a lot of this commentary because I think it's a great tool of learning that I highly recommend you consider purchasing one. It's really helped me a lot. Normally, I just like to, you do different reasons, but when I teach, I think it's very important. In verse 19, chapters 19, verse 4 says, do not turn to idols to make cast images for yourselves. I am Elohim, Adonai your Elohim. He's establishing his authority. Ancient Near Eastern people regarded their deities as powerful living beings, but they worship gods through idols, identify with them, which were believed to somehow partake of the divine essence. By contrast, the Elohim of Israel refused to be identified with material representations, which would limit and distort human perception regarding him. That's why in Deuteronomy chapters 14, verse 15 on, says, since you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you on Horeb out of the fire, take care and watch yourself closely. Now remember, the people didn't see the form, but there were 70 people who ate at the mountain, and it says, and they saw Elohim. That's another conversation as we go. Okay, but the whole idea is not to have images. Why? That's why on top of the Ark of the Covenant, there was never an image. See, the image itself is not a god, and the ancients did not believe that the image was a god. They believed that the ancient was the conduit, that there was a representation of that particular god. Okay, and as we continue to go through here, you're going to see what I mean. Let's move on to verses on the IVP. Let me go over here on verses 9 and 10. Okay, now this is really important because verses 9 and 10 on chapters 19 tells us, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field and gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am Adonai your Elohim. Now, I understand those are laws of righteousness and justice. Every king in the ancient world when he became king, wanted to establish righteousness, mishpat v'sadakah, so that his kavod, so that his honor can be exalted, and all the nations will run to the worship and the loyalty to that Elohim. Now, the difference is as to why the Lord says to leave the corners of their fields to the poor. Did you know that in intentionally inefficient harvesting, infertility cults, infertility rituals of the other nations, the portions left in the field would have served as an offering to the deities of the ground. In other words, they will leave the corners of the agricultural harvest on harvest so that they will take it and they will bring it as an offering to their pagan gods. So what does the Elohim of Israel does? He says, no, you leave it as it is, and that's not for me. That is for the poor. That is for the needy. That's for the stranger. That's for those people for righteousness and justice. In other words, that's not for me to eat because I'm not going to eat. Okay, my table is there. I have meat, I have wine, I have a table so you can fellowship with me, but I'm not like those gods that they used to dress them, they used to feed them or try to feed them, and they try to do those things. So we see clearly here how the practice of ancient Near Eastern fertility rituals is completely demolished when you read the Torah. They used to leave the corners of their fields as an offering for their gods, and Yah says, no. You're going to leave the corners of your fields for the people in need, so they will know that I am righteous and that I am holy to them, and they should be holy to me. Okay? Now, social contract. In Leviticus 19, verse 11, all the way to 19, 16 says this: you should not steal, you should not deal falsely, You should not lie to one another. And you should not swear false by my name, profaning the name of your Elohim. I am the Lord. You should not defraud your neighbor. You should not steal, and you should not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. You should not revile the deaf and put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your Elohim. I am Elohim. Adonai. You should not render an unjust judgment. You should not be partial to the poor or defer to the gray. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. Okay, so what are these laws all about? They are apodictic laws. Apodictic compared to casuistic. Casuistic laws are like the blessings and curses in Deuteronomy chapters 28. If you do this, I will do this. Now, apodictic is like I tell you to do this and you do it because I said so. In other words, there's no explanation for it. Now, this is another set of apodictic commands. I'm going to read from the commentary. It says, decree similar to the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, verse 117. It provides an even fuller concept of social contract between Elohim and the Israelites. Very important concept. As well as the rights and obligations of the Israelites among themselves. There are no other examples, listen to this, there are no other examples of such social contracts between people and their deity. However, the ancient Near Eastern gods were believed to be concerned about justice in society, and people consider themselves accountable to the gods, either of their personal family gods or Shamash, the god of justice. In Egypt, it was Ma'at. Okay? The gods were believed to judge people's conduct and were called upon to witness behavior in the human realm. Thus, the social contract that governed human behavior among Israel's neighbors were made between the human parties with gods invoked by oath as protectors. Now, the difference is that the contract that was made on the covenant that was made with Yah and the people, he is initiating it. Completely different than any other nation in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you have kings and kings coming in covenants and using the gods as a witness. Israel's the only nation in society and on the earth who is the deity itself, who initiates a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then with all of Israel. This is amazing to think that now he is so concerned about social justice, about mishpat v'sadakah, and when we act according and behave and walked and help the needy, the homeless, the widows, the Levites, and we walked in our mandate to do righteousness and justice, now we exalt his name. Now we bring forth honor to his name, and now we become the true witnesses of his gospel. Like Yeshua became the true witness of the gospel of the Father, who brought through Yeshua, by Yeshua doing what? Taking care of the righteousness and justice. Same thing. Here you see something very significant, how the laws in these chapters in regards to social encounters with one another is a covenantal relationship with him. Vertical, horizontal relationship. If I do not honor you and you don't honor me, we are both shaming him. That's why debating one another and taking each other to task, we're shaming one another. And if we shame one another and we're in covenant with the same Elohim, then we are shaming him. But we can still bring correction to one another in a loving manner. Okay? Now let's move on. Or sometimes you gotta do it straight in a good biblical way so that people can also learn of what to do and what not to do. Now, in chapters 19, verse 19, it talks about mixing animals, seeds, materials. Some mixture were considered to be reserved for sacred use. So let me read the verse. The verse says, you shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your animals breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seeds, nor shall you put on a garment made of two different materials. Okay. Now, when you look into scripture, you're going to know quickly that the reason why this is done is because, like for example, wool and linen, you're not supposed to mix. To whom though? Because the priests were the only ones who could mix it. In the tabernacle, you have the mixture. And what we found out through ancient Near Eastern studies, and we have we have Daniel McGurr, we have Brian White, we got Matthew Vanderels, we have Tyler Rosenquist, we have Dina Dye, we have Joseph Good. These are our peer review. We have other people like Chris Pope, we have Nathan Mancuso, we have all the people. That's not including my friends in Latin America, that we put all these things and we researched them out, right? And what we found is that the mixture of linen and wool is prohibited to Israel because it was in use only by the tabernacle and the priests, the Kohanim, which are holy unto the Lord for the service of the sacred. And that's why it's a commandment not to. Now, it makes sense because I have a teaching that talks about frequencies in those particular garments and how they cancel themselves out. But think about it. If the tabernacle was, in fact, more like an electromagnetic frequency conductor because of the energy that will come out of that when the presence of the Lord will fall down and come down on the Day of Atonement, and you have the light and all that stuff, and the priests were not allowed to put shoes in the tabernacle and the temple, we know that wearing sandals represented authority over a particular piece of land, but also to be grounded. So now science get in the way and things like that. So when you put linen and wool, it cancels itself out. So it makes sense because now they will be grounded. Okay, but besides that, research that I've done in the past, we also found out reasons why it was not allowed. Because Israel is not in the role of the Levite priesthood. So therefore, that particular command is because it's already given to the priesthood and the temple, and in this case, the tabernacle here. Now, how come you're not supposed to mix the animals, inbred them, mixed breed? Because in the ancient world, you have mythology. You have the mythology of, a goat and a human being, or a horse and a human being, or a goat and a horse, and they're always so if Yahweh is trying to make a distinction between his people, his ways, his commandments, his statutes, he cannot allow Israel to do and behave and act the way the nations do. So he's making a separation. He's given them instructions so that they will never look or give the appearance that they are worshiping the Elohim of Israel as the Canaanites worshiping their gods, as the Hittites worship their gods, as the Mesopotamians worship their gods, or as the Egyptians worship their gods. Let me give you a few more here. Let me go down. I want to read you about divination and then talk about tattoos and stuff like that, which I see so many people in the Torah observant life getting tattoos, and I'm going like, I don't think they'll understand, or cutting themselves. But you should not eat anything with his blood. You should not practice usury or witchcraft. Now, we see it in the book of Micah. It says, his rulers give judgment for a bribe. Its priests teach for a price. Its prophets give oracles for money. And yet they lean upon the Lord and say, surely the Lord is with us. No harm shall come upon us. So this is a problem. Soothsayers, mediums, and sorcerers to determine the will of the gods and predict the future. These included the examination of entrails on sacrificial animals and the analysis of omen on various types and reading of the future on natural phenomena. Okay? The prohibition against eating meat with the blood still in it. Obviously, we know that's not supposed to be done. But in the book of Ezekiel speaks about divination and how they used to read the liver. And this was widely practiced in the ancient world, and it also found its way into Israeli lifestyle during the time of the kings. And that is a no-no. We know the king Saul went for a woman to do divination, to speak to Samuel, and that cost him a lot of problems. All right, so cutting, let me move on here to verse 28. I think that's all the time we're going to have. And cutting the body for the dead. The Muslims, the Shiites in Iraq, they do this, by the way. They give a particular celebration in honor of Ali, a descendant of Muhammad, and then they start beating themselves up with knives and cutting themselves in the head and their body. Okay, so this is widely practiced in Middle Eastern and Muslim world, depends on what sect, whether Sunni or whether Shiites, in this case more the Shiites. Now, cutting body for dead. Mourning and cultic practices sometimes included laceration of oneself. In 1 Kings 18:28, you see that. And then they cried aloud, and it was their custom. They cut themselves with a sword. They cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood gushed out over them. And also Jeremiah, both great and small shall die in this land, and they shall not be buried, and no one shall lament for them, and there shall be no gashing, no shaving of the head for them. So that was a way to honor their gods by cutting their bodies. We see that the prohibition may be due to its association with Canaanite religion. For instance, the Ugaritic cycle of story about the god Baal, right, in the year 1600 to 1200 BC, includes an example of a mourning by the chief god El over the death of Baal. His grief takes the ritual form of filling his hair with dirt, wearing sackcloth, and cutting himself with a razor. Okay? And the text reads that, quote, he plowed his chest like a garden. In other words, he was cutting himself, and it was part of fertility, ancient cultic rituals that is an abomination before Elohim. Tattoos, in verse 28. The prohibition against marking the skin may involve either tattooing or painting the body as part of a ritual, religious ritual. Such markings may have been designed to protect the person from the spirits of the dead or to demonstrate membership in a group. Okay, so they're using tattoos as a way of apotropic protection from demons. And thus, because that was practiced, Yahweh says it's not acceptable in my kingdom. And lastly, we know that prostitution is against the Torah. And when you look into prostitution in the ancient world, you have different ones. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, that the land may not be called prostituted, full of abominations, right? Of depravity. Now, remember that the land is holy. So by you giving your daughter into prostitution, you, in fact, what you're doing is dishonoring her, you dishonor your family, and you dishonor your community, thus bringing shame, bringing busha. Okay? So when you bring shame into your community, you lose face, and by you being in covenant with him, if you are shaming yourself, you are shaming your Elohim. Remember, the Canaanites, they used to practice incest just like the Egyptians. The Canaanites used to practice bestiality. The Canaanites used to practice all kinds of abominations that we found out last week's Torah portion, right? Achagemot. So the creator of heaven and earth wants Israel to be distinct, to be a light unto the nations, to behave in a manner that is honorable, not only to themselves, but more importantly, honorable to the creator and their Elohim, their great king and their suzerain. This is only a short did you know on the Torah portion, Kedoshim. Kedoshim, it's a very important Torah portion because he wants us to be holy. Remember, being a holy nation is the highest level of honor. Keeping his holy Shabbat, he raises our honor from the common to the holy so that we may fellowship with him. Keeping his holy feast, he gives us the opportunity to present ourselves in the presence of the great king to bring forth a tribute to him. Keeping the holy commandments, they're holy because they're his. They put us above the nations because it's his wisdom and his understanding. The land is holy, the priesthood is holy, the covenant is holy. And did you know that if you call any of the things that he made holy, he declared these are my holy things, and you say they are done away with, or you eliminate them, or you change them, or you proclaim your own itinerary, or your own feast, or your own calendars, and everything that is not according to what he established, then we bring shame to his words, and we are changing what has been prescribed. Let us be careful, because our duty as Israelites, as the kingdom, is to honor, to uplift, to praise, and to honor the creator of heaven and earth, and his son Yeshua, who is sitting at his right hand, according to like scripture says. He is our master, he is our Messiah, and he led us in honor, revealing the integrity and the name of his Father, so that we will be honorable people. so that in our actions and our dealings with one another, we can bring honor to his name. Shalom, lehitraot. See you next week.